You want the truth? You can't handle the truth. Sorry, folks, I was just doing my Jack Nicholson, but I do need a moment to help out this Roman who seems to be in a bit of a pickle. Noble Caesar, I know that you have someone whom you really care about. Yeah, I know about Cleopatra and your son Caesarion, but I was thinking more of your wife Calpurnia. I'll gladly give you my professional advice, but in this case, it's also applicable to all of your friends, Romans, and countrymen, because it's not just you, but all of you fellows who better beware. Yeah, I know you think everybody loves you, but Caesar, between you and me, a few of your buddies, they sure look shady. Even the soothsayer told you to beware of the Ides of March. But if that's not enough reality for you, understand that I fear Marcus Brutus, Caius Cassius, Casca, Decius Brutus, Cinna, Metellus Cimba, Trebonius, and Caius Ligarius. Their blades are long and clenched tight in their fists. They have a lean and hungry look. And knowing the evil that men do, I'm afraid they're aiming straight at your back. And if they want you out of the picture, I don't think they'll miss their chance to do so. I thought you should know that Brutus keeps getting all these visits from thy so-called friends. Yeah, and I think I know what they're doing over there. To me, it looks like a conspiracy. They come to his house again and again and again, and always very late at night. Caesar, you started out by asking me, what can I do to get on the right track? I wish I knew, but if I were you, I'd want to know what they do over there, because I believe they're smiling in your face, but all the time, they want to take your place. Who? What do you mean, who? The backstabbers. If you grew up like I did in the 1960s, you probably remember that on the Adventures of Superman TV show of the 1950s, the Daily Planet's editor-in-chief was Perry White, and his famous catchphrase was, "Great Caesar's ghost." But the first time I was ever exposed to Julius Caesar was in the 1935 Little Rascals episode entitled Beginner's Luck, in which Spanky performs Mark Antony's famous Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech in order to win an amateur talent contest prize. Well, all I can say is, if Julius Caesar was good enough for Superman and Spanky, that's good enough for me. So let's take a look at the plot. As the play opens, two tribunes, or appointed Roman officials, Flavius and Marullus, are annoyed that citizens of Rome are celebrating Julius Caesar's triumphant return after defeating the sons of his military rival Pompey. The tribunes rebuke the crowd for changing their allegiance from Pompey to Caesar in an attempt to end the festivities and break up the commoners who in turn mock the tribunes. During the feast of Lupercal, Caesar holds a parade to celebrate his victory, and a soothsayer warns him to beware the Ides of March, which he ignores. Meanwhile, Cassius tries to persuade Brutus to join a conspiracy to kill Caesar, and although Brutus is friendly towards Caesar and hesitant to kill him, eventually he agrees that Caesar may abuse his power if he becomes a king. The two men speak with Casca, who tells them that Mark Antony offered Caesar the crown of Rome 3 times during the celebration. Casca reveals that each time Caesar refused it with an increasing reluctance, as if he hoped the crowd would insist that he accept the crown, and he recounts how the crowd applauded Caesar for denying the crowd and that Caesar was upset by their reaction. On the eve of the Ides of March, the conspirators gather, revealing that they have forged letters of support from the Roman people to use in order to tempt Brutus into joining them. Brutus reads the letter, and after much moral debate, he decides to join the conspiracy, thinking that Caesar should be killed to prevent him from doing anything against the people of Rome, if he were to ever be crowned king. Caesar's wife Calpurnia is upset that he's ignored the soothsayer's warning as well as her own premonitions of his murder in a dream and is planning to go to the Senate anyway. Although he initially hesitates to appease his wife, Decius convinces him that he needs to go because the Senate may want to make him king. At the Senate, the conspirators approach Caesar with a fake petition pleading to have Metellisimba's banished brother restored. As expected, Caesar rejects the petition. Then suddenly Casca stabs him, and the others all follow suit, with Brutus being the last to do so, and Caesar famously asks, "Et tu, Brute?" which means, "And you, Brutus?" concluding with, "Then fall, Caesar." The conspirators try to convince the citizens that they killed Caesar for the good of Rome and to prevent him from becoming a tyrannous king. They attempt to prove this by not trying to flee the scene. Instead, Brutus delivers an oration defending his actions, and for a moment the crowd seems to be satisfied. However, Mark Antony makes a persuasive and eloquent speech over Caesar's corpse, beginning with, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." He effectively turns public opinion against the assassins by manipulating the emotions of the Roman citizens. Antony reminds the crowd about the good Caesar had done for Rome, his sympathy for the poor, and his refusal of the crown at the feast of Lupercal, thus creating doubts on Brutus's claim that Caesar was ambitious. Antony shows Caesar's bloody, lifeless body to the crowd in order to gain sympathy for the fallen leader. And he reads Caesar's will in which every Roman citizen would receive 75 drachmas, which would be about 1 day's wage. This rouses the mob to drive the conspirators from Rome. The rioters take Caesar's body to the Forum, light his funeral pyre, and use the pyre to light torches to burn down the homes of the conspirators. Unfortunately, during the rioting, an innocent poet named Cinna is confused with the conspirator Lucius Cinna and is taken by the mob, which kills him for such offenses as his bad verses. Outside of Rome, Brutus attacks Cassius for supposedly soiling the noble act of killing Caesar by having accepted bribes, asking, "Did not great Julius bleed for justice' sake? What villain touched his body that did stab, and not for justice?" After some dramatic posturing, the two are reconciled, especially after Brutus reveals that his beloved wife Portia committed suicide by swallowing fire because of the stress of her husband's absence from Rome. Cassius and Brutus prepare for a civil war against Mark Antony, Caesar's adopted son Octavius, and Lepidus, who have formed a triumvirate in Rome. That same night, Caesar's ghost appears to Brutus in his tent and warns him of defeat, vowing, "Thou shalt see me at Philippi." Meanwhile, at the Battle of Philippi, Cassius and Brutus, knowing that they will probably both be killed in battle, smile their last, hold hands, and bid each other farewell. During the battle, Cassius hears of the capture of his best friend Titinius and has a slave named Pindarus stab him to death. He does that and flees, but afterwards Titinius, who is not actually captured, sees Cassius's corpse and commits suicide himself. Brutus wins that stage of the battle, but his victory is inconclusive, and so when Brutus fights again the next day, he asks his friends to kill him, but they all refuse. He then commits suicide by running on his sword, held for him by a loyal soldier named Strato. The play ends with Antony paying tribute to Brutus and proclaiming Brutus the noblest Roman of them all, because he was the only conspirator who truly acted in his mind for the good of Rome. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in Julius Caesar. It's been said that William Shakespeare has been captivating audiences and inspiring actors for 400 years. It's also been said that Shakespeare has been annoying high school students for more than 100 years. A good reason for that saying is because Julius Caesar was one of the very first Shakespeare plays that was added to the American high school curriculum when English literature became popular. But the fault, dear viewers, lies not within the play, but within our previous lack of exposure and appreciation for the talents of William Shakespeare. In preparing this episode for you, it helped me to realize that Julius Caesar is an excellent introduction to Shakespeare for young people because it contains some famous historical events, relevant lessons in politics, and interesting characters of various nobility and notoriety. The key is that educators need to help introduce today's audiences and students to the beauty of the language and recognize this work as a magnificent vehicle for people studying acting to demonstrate what they can do and grow into accomplished actors. So let's start examining these characters. Although the play is called Julius Caesar, his role ends in Act 3, Scene 1, where he's stabbed to death in the Capitol. Caesar is beloved by the citizens of Rome, but his assassination was considered necessary not because he is using his ambition to become a tyrant, but that were he to be crowned king in the future, he might be tyrannic. If you've ever seen the futuristic 2002 movie Minority Report, people are preemptively incarcerated if it's thought that they are likely to commit a crime in the future. Marcus Brutus is truly the central character of this play, despite its title. He's referred to as the soul of Rome, Caesar's angel, and the noblest Roman of them all. And while he may not like everything Caesar does, he is a friend and a supporter of his. However, that changes when he's acted upon by Caius Cassius, a passionate Roman citizen who's jealous of Julius Caesar and a world-class manipulator and instigator who riles up not only Brutus, but all of the other conspirators and leads to successful assassination plot on Caesar's life. What's most important to understand is that Cassius is a necessary catalyst, without whom the assassination of Caesar would have never taken place. In Act 1, Scene 2, we see how easily Cassius preys on Marcus Brutus by filling him with discontent, resentment, and jealousy of Caesar's status. Cassius begins, "Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we, petty men, walk under his huge legs and peep out to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. Brutus and Caesar, what should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is as fair a name. Sound them. It doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them, it is as heavy. Conjure with them. Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. Now, in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed, that he is grown so great?" This type of instigation has been quite effectively used throughout history in order to bring about revolution and political change, particularly with the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the rise of communism. You first have to get people worked up, and then you focus them on your political cause. As you can see, Cassius is a master of this technique. Another one of the conspirators is Casca. Casca comes across as a yenta. He loves to meddle in other people's business and craves attention. Here he is in Act 1, Scene 2, making the most of the information about the Lupercal celebration that he has and Cassius wants. Cassius says, "Did Cicero say anything?" "Aye, he spoke Greek." "To what effect?" "Nay, and to tell you that, I never look you in the face again." But those that understood him smiled at one another and shook their heads. But for mine own part, it was Greek to me. The phrase, "it's all Greek to me," has come to mean that someone is speaking, but we have no idea what they're saying. But it's interesting that Cicero would choose to speak Greek when addressing a Roman crowd. The Romans were quite proud of their culture and didn't take a back seat to anyone else, especially the Greeks. I believe Shakespeare is using this example to demonstrate that in ancient Rome, the times they were a-changin'. Mark Antony was Caesar's closest friend, but was not included in the faction of conspirators because they knew he would not go along with the plot. We know from the following play, Antony and Cleopatra, that Antony was not without his flaws, including excessive drinking, masking, and infidelities with Cleopatra. But in this play, he serves as the voice of Rome, cries out for justice against the murderers. In Act 3, Scene 1, once Mark Antony has placated the conspirators and convinced them that he's not a threat to them, he's left alone with Julius Caesar's corpse, and we hear him pouring out his heart in this famous soliloquy. "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. Over thy wounds now do I prophesy, which, like dumb mouths, do open their ruby lips to beg their voice and utterance of my tongue. A curse shall light upon the limbs of men. Domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. All pity choke with custom of fell deeds, and Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge with Arte by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war, that this foul deed shall smell above the earth with carrion men, groaning for burial." By this speech, Mark Antony shows his true colors, and that regardless of what he said to the conspirators, he'll make sure that they pay for the assassination of Julius Caesar. Along with the other two members of the triumvirate, Octavius Caesar and Lepidus, Mark Antony uses his superior military strategy to hunt down all of the conspirators. And finally, let's take a look at Marcus Brutus's wife, Portia. Along with Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, they are the only two prominent women featured in the entire play. We don't see a lot of Portia in this play, but in Act 2, Scene 1, we see that she knows that Brutus is up to something, but won't disclose it to her. She knows him well enough to know that he's not sick as he claims, but is troubled with a scheme. Here she is demonstrating her ability for him to trust her with his secret. Portia says, "If this were true, then should I know this secret? I grant I am a woman, but withal a woman that Lord Brutus took to wife. I grant I am a woman, but withal a woman well reputed Cato's daughter. Think you I am no stronger than my sex, being so fathered and so husbanded? Tell me your counsels, I will not disclose them. I have made strong proof of my constancy, giving myself a voluntary wound here in the thigh, and I bear that with patience and not my husband's secrets." And Brutus rightfully says, "O ye gods, render me worthy of this noble wife." In Godfather, Michael Corleone tells his wife Kay, "Never ask me about my business. All I can say is that it's a good thing for Michael that he didn't have to contend with Portia." When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in Julius Caesar. Shakespeare was very fond of using ghosts as plot devices. He did so in Hamlet, Macbeth, and Richard III. And just like Hamlet's father, the ghost of Caesar comes back from the grave to seek vengeance for his murder at Philippi. We've seen strange signs and prophecies in other plays like Macbeth, Edward III, and Henry VI Part 3, but in Julius Caesar, they take center stage. As Casca walks the streets of Rome, he recounts incredible sights, including a slave whose hand flamed and burned like 20 torches, and yet he remained unscorched. He passed a lion that looked at him and then passed by without any incident. 100 ghastly women swore they saw men all in fire up and down the streets, and a night owl shrieked at noontime. In Act 2, Scene 2, we hear Calpurnia plead with her husband to stay home. She begins, "Caesar, I never stood on ceremonies, yet now they fright me. There is one within, besides the things that we have heard and seen, recounts most horrid sights seen by the watch. A lioness hath whelped in the streets, and graves have yawned and yielded up their dead. Fierce, fiery warriors fought upon the clouds in ranks and squadrons, and right form of war which drizzled blood upon the Capitol. The noise of battle hurtled in the air. Horses did neigh, and dying men did groan, and ghosts did shriek and squeal about the streets. Caesar, these things are beyond all use, and I do fear them. Caesar says, what can be avoided, whose end is purposed by the mighty gods? Yet Caesar shall go forth, for these predictions are to the world in general as to Caesar. Calpurnius says, when beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. Caesar replies, cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. Caesar asks his servant, what say the augurers? Actually, it's augurs. The servant says, they would not have you stir forth today. Plucking the entrails of an offering forth, they could not find a heart within the beast. And of course, in Act 1, Scene 1, the soothsayer utters the most famous prophecy in any Shakespeare play, beware of the Ides of March. By the way, this particular episode took more than a week to record, but today's track and several others are being recorded on March 15th, 2025. The Ides of March. In this play, some of the most memorable scenes are death scenes, certainly those of Brutus and Cassius. Naturally, the death of Caesar in Act 3, Scene 1 is an unforgettable scene, and we'll look at that in just a little while. But it's also interesting in this play that many of the most memorable scenes are really unseen. We hear about Caesar being given the crown 3 times and turning it down, but we don't see it. We hear about Portia swallowing fire, but we don't see it, nor would we want to. But what we do see is Brutus's reaction to hearing the news of her death. Here he is in Act 4, Scene 2, alone in his tent with Cassius. Brutus says, no man bears sorrow better. Portia is dead. Cassius can't believe it. Ha, Portia? Brutus says, she is dead. Cassius says, how scaped I killing when I crossed you so? Oh, insupportable and touching loss! Upon what sickness? Brutus says, impatient of my absence and grief that young Octavius and Mark Antony have made themselves so strong, for with her death that tidings came. With this she fell distract, and her attendants absent, swallowed fire. What a way to go. A few minutes later in the same scene, we hear Messala say, then like a Roman bear the truth I tell, for certain she is dead, and by strange manner. And all Brutus says is, why, farewell, Portia. We must die, Messala. With meditating that she must die once, I have the patience to endure it now. Brutus's nonchalant response is similar to Mark Antony's response in Antony and Cleopatra upon hearing of his own wife Fulvia's death. He says, there's a great spirit gone. Thus did I desire it. What our contempts doth often hurl from us, we wish it ours again. The present pleasure, by revolution lowering, does become the opposite of itself. She's good being gone. When we return, we'll look at some of the major themes running through Julius Caesar. Power comes in all different forms, especially in this play, including military strength, position, status, credibility, wisdom, personal relationships, friendships, peer pressure, and mob mentality. Obviously, Caesar has power over the people because he's beloved for being a war hero, a good leader, and a friend. One would think Caesar's wife would have more power and influence over him, but we see that hers is limited and eventually overruled by Metellus Simba. Mark Antony not only has military power, he also has the ability to sway people and move them through his influence and words. Another key person whose influence is crucial is Marcus Brutus. He's called the soul of Rome and Caesar's angel. That's why it's so crucial that he's part of the faction, so that people will see the conspirators as noble rather than as butchers. When it comes to persuasion, Cassius is a master. He persuades Brutus to come on board with the conspiracy, and in turn that lends credibility to the others to go ahead with their assassination plot. But before this can happen, the first person Brutus must persuade is himself. In Act 2, Scene 1, we see in Brutus's soliloquy how he rationalizes killing his friend Julius Caesar and talks himself into taking part in the assassination. Brutus says, "It must be by his death, and for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn at him, but for the general. He would be crowned. How that might change his nature? There's the question. It is the bright day that brings forth the adder, and that craves wary walking. Crown him that, and then I grant we put a sting in him, that at his will he may do danger with. The abuse of greatness is when it disjoins remorse from power. And to speak the truth of Caesar, I have not known when his affection swayed more than his reason. But 'tis a common proof that lowliness is young ambition's ladder, whereto the climber upward turns his face. But when he once attains the upward round, he then unto the ladder turns back, looks in the clouds, scorning the base degrees by which he did ascend. So Caesar may. Then, lest he may, prevent. And since the quarrel will bear no color for the thing he is, fashion it thus, that what he is augmented would run to these and these extremities, and therefore think him as a serpent's egg, which hatched would as his kind grow mischievous, and kill him in the shell. In other words, we're not going to kill Caesar because of what he's done, we're going to kill him because of what he might do if he became king. This is where the argument comes in. If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler or baby Osama bin Laden because of what they might do, would it be justified? Portia demonstrates that she has greater influence over her husband than Calpurnia does over Caesar. She's even willing to slice open her thigh to demonstrate that she can keep a secret, and she prevails on her husband to share his plans with her. Prophecies are meant to be warnings to prevent terrible things and events from happening, yet Caesar continuously ignores them. He doesn't heed the soothsayer's warning to beware the Ides of March, and he won't even read Artemidorus' schedule. It's ironic that even though Caesar discounts Calpurnia's foresights and intuition, he believes in being cautious enough that he tries to impart that to others. In Act 1, Scene 2, we get to see a little bit of Caesar's personal fears exposed very intimately to his closest and most trusted friend, Mark Antony. Caesar says, "Let me have men about me that are fat, sleek-headed men and such as sleep at nights. Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous." And Antony says, "Fear him not, Caesar. He's not dangerous. He is a noble Roman and well given." And Caesar says, "Would he were fatter, but I fear him not. Yet if my name were liable to fear, I do not know the man I should avoid so soon as that spare Cassius. He reads much. He is a great observer, and he looks quiet through the deeds of men. He loves no plays as thou dost, Antony. He hears no music. Seldom he smiles, and smiles in such a sort as if he mocked himself and scorned his spirit that could be moved to smile at anything. Such men as he be never at heart's ease while they behold a greater than themselves, and therefore are they very dangerous. I rather tell thee what it is to be feared than what I fear, for always I am Caesar." Julius Caesar speaks to Mark Antony almost like a mentor to a protege or a father to a son, pretending to give him advice that he might practice, but insisting that because he is Caesar, he doesn't have to fear anyone. Sadly, we know that Calpurnia's insights from her dream and intuitions on that day are spot on. Let's face it, it's one thing if you don't get a warning that something's wrong. It's another thing if you get it and you ignore it. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in Julius Caesar. It wasn't until I started working on this episode that I realized just how magnificent the speeches in this play really are. It's no wonder that educators chose Julius Caesar to be the first Shakespeare work to be introduced to high school students. The more you delve into the beauty of the language and understand all of the implications of what's being said, the more you'll learn to appreciate it. Of course, what we all came to see, though, is the death of Caesar. In Act 3, Scene 1, Caesar gets stabbed in the Capitol. As the conspirators come up with a ruse to get Caesar alone, he exposes his fatal flaw, which is his constancy. Caesar says, "I could be well moved if I were as you. If I could pray to move, prayers would move me. But I am constant as the northern star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament. The skies are painted with unnumbered sparks. They are all fire, and every one doth shine, but there's but one in all doth hold his place. So in the world 'tis furnished well with men, and men are flesh and blood and apprehensive. Yet in the number I do know but one that unassailable holds on his rank, unshaked of motion, and that I am he." And then, as he's stabbed, Caesar utters those infamous words, "Et tu, Brute?" Then fall, Caesar. Cinna cries, "Liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead. Run hence, proclaim, cry it about the streets." Cassius chimes in, saying, "Some to the common pulpits and cry out liberty, freedom, and enfranchisement." And almost prophetically, he adds, "How many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted over in states unborn and accents yet unknown?" In Act 3, Scene 2, we see why Cassius and the others were so determined to have Brutus join their faction. They needed him to give an eloquent speech to the outraged citizens of Rome. Here's what he has to say to them. "Be patient to the last. Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause, and be silent that you may hear. Believe me, for mine honor, and have respect to mine honor, that you may believe. Censor me in your wisdom, and awake your senses that you may better judge. If there be any in this assembly, any dear friend of Caesar's, to him I say that Brutus' love to Caesar was no less than his. If then that friend demand why Brutus rose against Caesar, this is my answer. Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. Had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves, than that Caesar were dead to live all free men? As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. There is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. Who is he so base that would be a bondman? If any speak, for him have I offended. Who is he so rude that would not be a Roman? If any speak, for him I have offended. Who is here so vile that will not love his country? If any speak, for him I have offended. I pause for a reply. There's no question that Brutus's speech was effective, but his fatal flaw was not what he said, but when he said it. He never should have had Mark Antony follow him. Antony begins his famous speech, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievous hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me, my heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back. Here we see that Mark Antony definitely knows how to work the crowd. Unlike Coriolanus, who didn't want to play the game of politics, Mark Antony demonstrates that he is a master of it. He continues pointing out holes in Caesar's bloodied robe. Look, in this place ran Cassius' dagger. See what a rent the envious Casca made. Through this the well-beloved Brutus stabbed, and as he plucked his curved steel away, mark how the blood of Caesar followed it, as rushing out of doors to be resolved if Brutus so unkindly knocked or no. For Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. Judge, O you gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all, for when the noble Caesar saw him stab, ingratitude more strong than traitor's arms quite vanquished him. Then burst his mighty heart, and in his mantle muffling up his face, even at the base of Pompey's statue, which all the while ran blood, great Caesar fell. By the end of this speech, the crowds are worked up into a frenzy, and they start burning the conspirators' homes. This is why, when debating or attempting to persuade people, it's always better to be last than to be the best. When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in Julius Caesar and some correlations to the other Shakespeare plays. I consider a turning point to be an event depending upon what happens next that will alter the course of the future. Virtually every scene in Julius Caesar contains some type of turning point, but let's just look at a few of them. Certainly, Caesar had enough warnings to save his life. Had he listened to the soothsayer's warning, had he listened to Calpurnia's pleadings, or had he just read Artemidorus' schedule, any of these could have prevented his assassination. But because he was, as he said, as constant as the northern star, and didn't want to miss a chance to wear a crown, it cost him his life. Naturally, once Casca struck Caesar with the first blow, that was the point of no return. The others followed suit, and all the conspirators were left with blood on their hands. Another major turning point was Brutus deciding not to kill Mark Antony along with Caesar, and allowing Mark Antony to speak to the public after Brutus. This was Brutus's fatal flaw, because once the Roman citizens heard him speak, the conspirators were seen for what they were, a bunch of unauthorized assassins who were jealous of their beloved leader. There are also a lot of correlations to other Shakespeare plays in Julius Caesar. For example, Coriolanus lived in Rome around 494 BC, and Caesar lived in Rome about 44 BC, or 450 years later. The people hated Coriolanus, even though he was a great warrior, because he couldn't relate to the people. However, Julius Caesar also was a great warrior, but the people loved him because he walked among them and wept over them. In other words, he knew how to play the game. Caesar and Mark Antony stage getting the crown 3 times to gauge how Roman citizens take his refusal of it. In Richard III, Richard has Buckingham urge him several times to wear the crown, but Richard turns them down several times before he finally gives in. What a showman. After his death, Mark Antony bears Julius Caesar's wounds to the public to gain support against the conspirators, but Coriolanus refused to bear his wounds to the public in order to gain support for him being named to the consul. Julius Caesar the play deals with the nature of kinship, as does Henry IV, Part 1. Both Julius Caesar and Henry VIII were both beloved and feared by their citizens. In Edward III, the Earl of Salisbury asks his French prisoner Villiers to get him a passport for safe passage to Calais and promises him his freedom in exchange. In Antony and Cleopatra, Mark Antony asks his loyal slave Eros to kill him, but he kills himself instead. Brutus asks his followers to kill him, but they all refuse. The best he can do is to have Strato hold his sword so that he can run on it. And even Cassius has to beg his slave Pindarus to kill him in exchange for his freedom. Caesar tells Mark Antony that Cassius loves no plays. In The Merchant of Venice, Lorenzo says of his new father-in-law Shylock, "The man hath no music in himself." The soothsayer, Artemidorus, and Calpurnia, after her dream, plead with Caesar not to go to the capital, but he doesn't listen. In Troilus and Cressida, Hecuba, Andromache, and Cassandra, who have also had dreams, plead for Hector not to go to battle, but he doesn't listen. Brutus is very reluctant to share his assassination plot with his wife Portia, but eventually he does. In Henry IV, Part 1, Lady Percy does everything she can to get Hotspur, her husband, to open up about his plans, but he never confides in her. And finally, we hear about wonderful, if not terrifyingly strange sights like a night owl screeching at noon in the marketplace and coffins opening up and releasing the dead. In Macbeth, an old man says that a falcon was, by a mousing owl, hawked at and killed, and that Duncan's horses ate each other. What was going on back then? When we return, we'll look at some of the interesting facts about Julius Caesar. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research, and this is what I found. Shakespeare wrote Julius Caesar around 1599, just after writing the history plays Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, and Henry V, and just before beginning his tragedies, including Hamlet. Shakespeare used Sir Thomas North's 1580 English translation of Plutarch's Parallel Lives as a chief source for this play. Julius Caesar's full name was Gaius Julius Caesar, and he did suffer from falling sickness, or what we would call today epilepsy. However, there's no evidence that he ever had any trouble with his hearing. He was married 3 times, first to Cornelia, who died young and gave him one daughter named Julia, second to Pompeia, whom he divorced, and finally to Calpurnia, whom he married when she was just a teenager. Calpurnia really was sterile. However, Caesar also had a son named Caesarion, who was born out of wedlock to Caesar's mistress Cleopatra. Octavius Caesar was Caesar's grandnephew, heir, namesake, and adopted son. Marcus Brutus married his second wife and first cousin Portia in the same month in which he divorced his first wife, Claudia. Portia was also Cato's daughter. By the way, the word Caesar translates to monarch, and the Ides of March refers to the middle of the month, or in other words, March 15th. There are several mentions of lions walking the streets of Rome in this play. We know that there were lions in Rome because early in his career, Caesar used to sponsor and stage gladiator games with his own money. There are a number of anachronisms in Julius Caesar. For example, there are several inquiries about what time the clock is striking. However, there were no clocks designed to strike in ancient Rome. That invention came in the Middle Ages. In addition, Brutus asks, "Is not the leaf turned down where I left reading?" But there were no such books yet invented when he lived BC. In Act 3, Scene 1, Caesar inquires about the augurers, but he actually meant augurs, who were priests who read signs and explained what they meant. There's also no evidence that he ever said et tu, Brute, or anything else for that matter when he was stabbed. That was an invention of Richard Ides in his work Caesar Interfectus, which was written in 1592. Shakespeare first used that quote, et tu, Brute, in Henry VI, Part 3, and Ed Norton once paraphrased it during an episode of The Honeymooners. Also, even though Perry White used to use the catchphrase, Great Caesar's Ghost on the Adventures of Superman, that phrase is never mentioned once in the entire play. In the song Dice Are Rolling from the Broadway musical Evita, Juan Perón sings the lines, "The knives are out. I see every bad sign in the book, and as far as they can, overweight to a man, they have that mean and hungry look." In Dante's Inferno, which was published in 1321, he places in the ninth and lowest circle of hell the most infamous, Brutus, Cassius, and Judas Iscariot, to be punished for their treachery. Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Caesar, and Judas, who betrayed Jesus. To Dante, these men were the ultimate betrayers of humanity as they caused the fall of Caesar and the fall of Christ. All three are punished by being continually chewed on by Lucifer himself. And finally, when John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln, he calmly shouted out, "Sic semper tyrannis," which translates to, "Thus always to tyrants." But it's commonly believed that Brutus originated the phrase when he killed Julius Caesar. And even though there isn't much evidence to support this, as a Shakespearean actor, Booth would have likely believed that the phrase was connected to the assassination of Caesar. By using the phrase, it's speculated that Booth would see himself as the hero who saved the United States from tyranny in the same way Brutus did for Rome. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1979 BBC Shakespeare version of Julius Caesar. All right, now let's take a look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1979 BBC Shakespeare version of Julius Caesar. Richard Pascoe, who plays Brutus, also played Jaques in As You Like It in 1978. David Collings, who played Caius Cassius, also played Thurio in The Two Gentlemen of Verona in 1983. Elizabeth Spriggs, who plays Calpurnia, also played Mistress Quickly in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1983. And Mrs. Jennings in the 1995 version of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, alongside Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet. Sam Daster, who plays Casca, also played Angelo in The Comedy of Errors in 1983. John Sterland, who plays Morellus, also played Cornelius in Hamlet in 1980. Reginald Jessup, who plays a poet, also played the second Volscian senator in Coriolanus in 1984. Garrick Hogan, who plays Octavius Caesar, also played Montjoy the French herald in Henry V, also in 1979. Darian Engadi, who plays Cinna the conspirator, also played Alexis in Antony and Cleopatra in 1981. Ronald Forfar, who plays the soothsayer, also played John Bates in Henry V, also in 1979. David Henry, who plays the fourth plebeian and second soldier, also played an English ambassador in Hamlet in 1980. John Forfan, who plays Cinna the poet, also played Francis Feeble in Henry IV, Part 2, also in 1979. Michael Coogan, who plays Caesar's servant, also played in The Second Company, in Henry VI Parts 1, 2, 3, and Richard III, all in 1983. And finally, Charles Gray, who plays Julius Caesar, also played the Duke of York in Richard II in 1978, Pandarus in Troilus and Cressida in 1981, and Silenus, the Duke of Ephesus, in the 1983 version of the Comedy of Errors. You might also recognize him as the criminologist in the 1975 cult classic, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now stay tuned for today's trivia challenge, which is called E-I-E-I-O. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge called E-I-E-I-O. Identify the Shakespeare plays that contain these characters whose names all end in I-O. Number 1, Antonio, Bassanio, and Solario. Number 2, Tranio, Hortensio, Gremio, Grumio, and Petruchio. And number 3, Mercutio and Benvolio. When we return, I'll have the answers for you, and we'll finish up with some relevant lessons from Julius Caesar. All right, let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called E-I-E-I-O. You are to identify the Shakespeare plays that contain these characters whose names all end in I-O. Number 1, Antonio, Bassanio, and Solario. That would be the Merchant of Venice. Number 2, Tranio, Hortensio, Gremio, Grumio, and Petruchio. That would be the Taming of the Shrew. And number 3, Mercutio and Benvolio. That would be Romeo and Juliet. Now let's finish up with some relevant lessons from Julius Caesar. First, I encourage you to master the fine arts of influence and persuasion. And if you want to sway people in a debate or a political arena, take a lesson from Mark Antony that it's better to be last than it is to be the best. Second, remember that with power comes responsibility. If you're a leader, heed these famous words of English nobleman Lord Acton, who said, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And finally, and this is directed to all of the married men, never ignore your wife's intuition. I'm sure if Julius Caesar had it all over to do again, he'd back me up on this. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo on Shakespeare. Please join me next time when all the fun begins as a result of confusion caused by identical twins.